Welcome to Cybersecurity Luminaries, History and Heroes, a series aimed to highlight the profession's humble beginnings and the men and women who paved the road for all of us. This series is brought to you by Candy Alexander and Cailin Sullivan, your co-hosts from the Cybersecurity Refined and Feral podcast.
Welcome, everyone, to a really, truly special installment of Cybersecurity Refined and Feral. I'm your co-host, Candy Alexander, and I'm truly thrilled to be joined, as always, by my brilliant daughter and co-host, Cailin Sullivan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cailin. So today we're going to be reaching into the top tier of our industry and have the distinct honor of welcoming Ira Winkler to Cybersecurity Luminaries, Histories, and Heroes. Welcome, Ira.
I'm honored. Thank you.
You have been, a thought leader within the industry for quite a while now. How did you initially get your start in it?
If you're talking about cybersecurity, the bizarre way of getting started was I was a psychology major in college, and the only people that would hire me was the U.S. government. Luckily, I took a test for an organization that few people have heard of at the time, which was the NSA, and I did really well. Otherwise, I would have been unemployed and maybe begging to get into grad school or something. So I ended up, I took the test for NSA, did well. They came and basically said, okay, we'll start you off as, well, it kind of like in a pool of people, because they said my scores were good enough that I didn't have to get a job before, where they went through orientation class, and then it was like a 5-week orientation. And through that time, I was supposed to interview with offices. I interviewed with offices. I chose a job which sounded so totally awesome. I did turn down a computer internship because I hated computers and wanted nothing to do with them. And then what happened was, after a while, I took a job as this intelligence analyst on a 24-hour watch center, and I hated that job. And I thought I couldn't hate computers any more than I hate that job. So I ended up applying to the computer internship, which I got into. And then I was doing that for a while. And then after a while, I got mad at my job in the government. So I went to government contractor. And then I was working for SAIC at the time, and somebody came to me and said, instead of going to the Pentagon, can you make a few phone calls? And 3 days later, I had control over one of the world's largest investment banks. And I joked stealing $1 billion was kind of a rush, and I liked doing that. And then my company also had a policy that if you had a paper accepted at a professional conference, they'd have to send you. So I would apply to conferences like Banff, Canada, Sydney, Australia, things like that. And there was a conference in Salt Lake City where I never was before. So I thought, okay, let's see what Salt Lake's like. And I submitted a paper and essentially had to take over a bank. It turned out to be the Usenix Security Conference, which at the time was one of the more prestigious conferences in the industry, if you even call it an industry. And then they were calling it the seminal work in social engineering. And I joke I had to look up what seminal meant and what social engineering meant. And people came to me to start doing weirder and weirder stuff. And I would do pen tests, and I got involved in incident response. I don't know how many people would remember the Citibank break-in where Vladimir Levin, a Russian hacker, stole $12 million from Citibank. So I helped, again, doing a lot of work on that. And then I ended up I really wanted to do commercial information security work, and I got a job with what was called at the time the National Computer Security Association. They ran events or they ran conferences, but they were also trying to be the certification body. And I was running the antivirus product certification, which was the industry standard at the time. And then I helped start the firewall product certification. Then they wanted to get out of consulting because they were taking venture capital, and they also were saying, "Oh, what's the security of the week?" Or sorry, the certification of the week, and that just sounded so wrong to me. And so I left and started doing consulting. NCSA became ICSA, International Computer Security Association, because why stop at US? And then they were acquired by Verizon. So ICSA Labs still has that little logo on some anti-malware sites.
Hmm.
Then I started my own company that I eventually sold to HP. I was chief security strategist at HP. And then what happened was how do I phrase this diplomatically? Well, I've already,
This is feral. We're feral here, Ira. Do whatever you want.
I mean, HP at the time was acquiring Compaq people, and the Compaq people were just such assholes. I mean, it was just such a, like HP had the HP way, being nice to everybody, which was a little borderline for me, if you know me. But at the same time, the Compaq people were just, I'll use the word feral assholes. It's like, they were trying, like the HP people were run over because they didn't realize how to deal with flaming assholes. And
Was
like,
it super competitive? Like how was
I mean, it was
just a
just
toxic
who was
culture?
running. It became a toxic culture. And so, for example, this is when Carly Fiorina was there, and she was a highly toxic individual.
Hmm.
I mean, she lost the company. I joke for every, she made $1 million for every $1 billion she lost the company. And it was, it was horrible. But anyway, so I left there, and then I ended up, doing a bunch of different stuff. I started another company focused on human aspects of cybersecurity.
Hmm.
Did that, sold that company. Then I became a CISO because I was never CISO before for a decent sized MSP. And then I was recruited to be chief security architect at Walmart, where I was. And now I'm CISO over at an Israeli company because I believe in the product. And then along the way, I've written 8 books. I've keynoted every major industry event and yada, yada, yada.
That's
Oh yeah.
just a whirlwind of a career. I love the
Yeah.
aspect too, Ira, that it's like, people who've been in this profession a long time, no two of us had started the same way. And it was just happenstance, it seems. You kind of like fell into cyber.
Well, I mean, that was the part that, frankly, is kind of what I think is hurting the profession now. There are these people selling these false sense of what should be.
Yeah.
Like, because I think like they're like, oh, everybody should get a degree in cybersecurity and get an entry level degree, an entry level job in cybersecurity. And I'm sitting here, you know what? Entry level job in cybersecurity is programming, it's administration, it's networking. And people are out there saying, well, if companies should give you a job. I'm like, no, you should go ahead and earn the job you want by doing a basic job. I don't know any other profession where somebody ever says, hey, you know what? I want to program AI, so I'm going to get a degree and I'm going to get my first job in AI. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. There's more AI jobs. I hate the word AI, but there's more AI related jobs than there are cybersecurity jobs. And at least there are companies that are specifically doing that,
Right.
but they have to first know how to program, and people just lose sight of the importance of the basics, because I don't get how people think they should go ahead and develop secure programming standards when they don't know how to program. And
Exactly.
that's another thing. I see so many people on LinkedIn and elsewhere touting how they don't know how to program, and I'm sitting there like,
Yeah.
our
Don't.
willful ignorance is unexcusable.
Exactly.
And
Mhm.
because, I mean, you don't have to know how to program, but it's so useful if you do. And
Yep.
it's so fundamental to how your other people's jobs. Like I know
Yes.
finance majors that are downloading Python on their own and learning to program in Python because they think that'll help them with financial analysis, and they don't even have to. And
Yep, that would be my fiance. He does that for his sales operations in his job.
yeah,
Yep.
I mean, exactly. Even security awareness, for example. If you don't know how to program Excel spreadsheets, I know that's a bad example, but even Excel macros are a form of programming. And if
Yes.
you have to understand how to do basic functions. And again, if you're going to be willfully ignorant about that, why should I train you in anything else?
Well,
Yep.
that goes back to, again, one of the reasons why we really wanted to do this Cybersecurity Luminaries, Heroes in History. It's because of individuals like you and others that have gone through the trailblazing experience. Oh, I've never done that before. Let me try it. That you've learned the lessons and shared that knowledge that our profession is built on, and that exploration characteristic is kind of missing today.
Well, I mean, I shouldn't even say that because, like, I'm using this example. Let's say I want to build or I want to be an architect and I want to architect one of my love's cruise ships. You know, you're sitting there, nobody goes to college to learn I am a cruise ship architect. There is no major for that. They go, they become an
Right.
architect. Maybe they take some other courses in maritime engineering or something.
Mhm.
But they go, they get a basic degree in architecture, and then they don't hold out and say, I'm not going to take any other job until Royal Caribbean offers me one on their new Discover class ships. And I'm like, they'd be idiots.
Right.
But it's the same thing in cyber. Like, what they would do is, or what they should do is, they get a job in an architectural firm. Hopefully, maybe they shop around for like hospitality. Might not
Hmm.
be architecting a ship, but maybe it's
Yeah.
architecting hotels or something. But that
Yeah.
depends where you get it. And
Yeah.
Yep.
even if you don't, you know, even if you don't, then okay, I get a basic architecture job. I develop some skills and then I learn the industry enough to know, okay, my next job, I can find a better company.
Right.
But in
Yep.
cybersecurity, people aren't being told to do that. They're just being like told you should be entitled to the job
Wow.
immediately out of college, or well, the people who say you don't even need college anymore, you should just think security is cool and they should give you a job because you spell security with a K instead of a C. Anyway.
Yes, I think that's just it. It's unfortunate that it's very prescriptive. But then I think our society has become very prescriptive. You will follow this roadmap, and these are the steps you're going to go to, and so on. There's no adventure. There's no exploration, and that's the unfortunate part. I think, right?
Yeah, I mean, there is in most other professions there are, like
Yeah.
like if I think a computer science degree is infinitely more valuable than a cybersecurity degree, even for cybersecurity. But
Right.
if you go to computer science, you go for computer science, and then you find whatever job presents itself to you.
Yeah. Your
You don't go
niche.
ahead and just say, I am holding my breath until somebody offers me the job of your choice. It's like,
Right.
no, do I want to do this? No, I really don't. But, that's the job that they're giving me.
Yep.
So it's interesting because Ira, when we first started, like no 80s, late 80s, that it seemed that was it. It was okay. This is, and back then it was information security, right? Or computer security, one and the same. But it was you're an analyst, and then I often say we're a profession of circumstance, right? Like one of the ways we first met and started talking is when I was at Digital. Kevin Mitnick broke in, and that's how we started talking is about that experience and whatnot. And that's obviously how I got started. It's like, okay, something happened, you go figure it out. So there's forensics, and then there's this, that, and the other. But, our profession has grown and morphed into so many specialties, it's almost like it's too vast and you're not left to explore.
Well, I mean, this is part of it. So, for example, when I was at NSA and doing computer work, it's like, okay, my first job, I was programming crays to do cryptanalysis. And people are going to ask, what's a cray? It's like, but, I was programming crays to do cryptanalysis. And then the next job, I was writing C code on Sun systems, which would be a completely different thing. But it was like, okay, then I was writing user interfaces.
Yeah.
And then the next job was an acquisition person. And the thing is that we were computer systems people that rotated to whatever job theoretically we wanted to take that would take us.
Right.
And a few of them were potentially cybersecurity. And like one of them I was writing, at the time, I didn't even think this was cybersecurity, but when I was filling out my grandfathered in for the CISSP, I filled out the paperwork. It's like, okay, I was writing software for a multi-level B2 system, like a compartmented mode workstation. So I guess, I'm programming secure systems.
Yes.
And it was just like, okay, I was a programmer that just happened to be working on that computer with that technology. Another job, I was doing configuration management. Another job, I was writing white box software testing. And white box software testing is like, in general, that's what, people do, like vulnerability researchers theoretically. That's just what we were doing to make sure the code didn't break.
Right.
And so, the whole thing of looking for a buffer overflow, I mean, that's a finite set of what a normal software tester or quality assurance person does. And so because of that, then you say, okay, find vulnerabilities in software. I'm like, that's the easy part. And too many people are like, they're like, oh, cybersecurity is cool and a specialty. It's like, well, it was never a specialty, so somebody wanted to call it a specialty.
Do you think that the pendulum has swung too far then? Because I agree.
I think the pendulum is definitely way too far, because I still think that, I wrote articles back. I remember I won an award in 2015 for the myth of the cybersecurity skills shortage in computer world. And I still think to this day, it's the same myth a decade later, because really, if I wanted to go ahead and I was responsible for staffing a cybersecurity program and I didn't have people or couldn't theoretically find them, the first thing I do is go, okay, who do I have on my IT staff that can do the job? Because most IT people are like, see, here's what people don't understand. Your internal IT people are probably like 5 to 10% of the way, or 5 to 10% away from your ideal candidate. While these new cybersecurity graduates with their like, certification fair going, bing, you're a CC today. I mean, those people are like 90% away.
Yeah.
And so by going ahead and focusing, I need certified people, I need people with no, you don't. You need somebody who knows how to do the fundamentals. And then you say, I just want you to do this as well. And so, for example, if I were going to go ahead and like, I remember, so when I was going ahead and like in the early days, there weren't that many penetration testers. And when I was working, for example, for SAIC and a couple others, I'd have to find people who could hack systems. And we didn't have hackers in theory at the time. And I would just walk around. I'm like, hey, can you do me a favor? I want you to break into the system. And they're like, what do you mean? Can I do that? I'm like, yeah, you can. And it's like, I basically want you to do what all the people are doing to you on your system that you have to stop. But they're like, I can do that. I'm like, and then I'm like, yeah. And then they're like, I can get away with it. I'm like, yeah. And it's a no-brainer for them.
Right.
Because they watch people break in. They knew how they broke in. I'm like, well, you can go on the internet and download tools to break in. And, and it was like really just a couple simple steps for a typical admin or networking consultant to all of a sudden know how to break into systems.
So what do you think the challenge is there then? Do you think it's our management approach? Is it too much constraints on individuals to not be able to experiment and explore? Where are we going?
HR.
Well,
Yeah.
I think a lot is tunnel vision, and I think it's got pretty complex. I think a lot of people in cybersecurity fundamentally seem to have forgotten their roots.
Yeah.
And when you talk to CISOs, I don't know any CISO out there. Well, I shouldn't say maybe I don't know too many CISOs who actually have like their undergraduate first job was in cybersecurity. And I don't know why all of a sudden they're like, oh, I need these colleges or whatever to hire people. These people
Yeah.
were like taking whatever job they got, and then somehow they fell into cybersecurity.
Yeah.
And that's great for them. But then all of a sudden they forgot. Then you have a big problem is the government, like the whole whisper system, in my opinion, if you want to call it not, well, they're just getting people's heads where now universities are frankly selling degrees.
Yep.
You have training organizations who are selling degrees. You have the certification organizations, which people can look at my article from like 8 or 9 months ago calling how ISC squared was
Mhm.
coming up with bullshit numbers to try to recruit unnecessary people into the profession.
Yeah.
And ironically, some board members said after he read my article, he was encouraged to resign from the board. I don't know if that's good or bad, but
Right. Well, it speaks to, doesn't it, Ira, the fact that because like I used to say, we're both I used to say past presidents. Thank you for that. And we did that ESG ISSA research survey, and we asked participants in that survey, how many certifications do you have and what are they? The total amount of certifications in that survey, over 180 different certifications. So doesn't that suggest that it's become its own industry? It's a
It's a
moneymaker.
moneymaker. Jinx.
Let me just say it is and it isn't. There is a
Mm.
purpose and place, in my opinion, for certifications.
Yes.
Because I remember, because again, I've been around long enough. I remember 2001 or so, year 2000, 2001, when you had VCs throwing hundreds, 70 million here, 80 million here, whatever it was, into companies like Gardent. And they were using metrics that headcount equals potential revenue. And that's how they were valuing companies. So you had the managers of Gardent finding high school students, literally not graduated, and calling them a junior cybersecurity analyst and giving them a card and sending them out into the field as a cybersecurity professional.
Yeah, what could go wrong?
What makes an actual a cybersecurity analyst? They're like, oh, they graduated high school, so they wouldn't be a junior one. But the problem is that anybody could put up a proverbial shingle without having a legitimate certification there. And so at least I know when I see someone with a certification that they have put in some amount of, now some mean more than others. That's important to understand.
Yes.
But you have to understand that if you have somebody, for example, even though I have criticized the hell out of ISC squared, a CISSP tells me minimally that somebody has invested a period of time or somehow they bullshitted their way to 5 years. They have taken a test which at least at one point in time says they have a base level of knowledge that a person should theoretically have regarding the overall cybersecurity profession. Does this mean they're the greatest? No. It's like, what the joke, what do you call the person who graduates at the bottom of their med school class? Doctor. It's the same type of thing. You don't know when you show up to a hospital, but at least you know that doctor
Yes.
has gone through med school hopefully not having killed someone or through gross negligence. And there's the assumption that, okay, somebody with a CISSP is not just throwing up a shingle. And then there's also the liability side, because a lot of people don't realize that, everybody's like, why should I have to have a CISSP? Because I know more than a CISSP does. I go, well, if you do, why can't you just take the test and pay that bullshit money for a profession you say makes you hundreds of thousands a year?
Right.
And they're like, I don't want to. I'm like, no, because you can't pass the test because you don't, whatever. And
Right.
that's fine. But if, for example, we see another, let's, for example, say there's an incident. I don't know, what's the latest incident du jour? Well, I can't use Coinbase. That wasn't a cybersecurity incident. But, whatever incident you open up somebody opens up. If you go ahead and it goes to court, the lawyers are going to say, okay, what qualifications do you have interviewing the people who did it? What qualifications do you have to theoretically do your job? Well, I don't have any. I know everything a CISSP does. I'm like, oh, well, good for you. So why don't you take the test to just prove that you did?
Exactly.
And then, gee, there's 1,000 other people your company could have hired that have documented that they know this information.
Well, what was that? I'm sorry to interrupt, but what was that? There was a famous breach. I can't remember what company it was. And
I think I know what you're talking about. The breach where it was a music major. I think it was Equifax, where they were blaming the music major.
And he never had any security experience at all. They named him CISO.
Oh, that UHG. That was United Health Group.
Yes.
That I criticize the hell, because normally I wouldn't point fingers at person, but I think that person who was already the CTO and the chief data officer simultaneously, with then being appointed CISO, because why not? I'm sitting there thinking that person is truly negligent.
Yes.
That person, and frankly, UHG is a Fortune 10 company.
Yes.
A Fortune 10 company should not say, hey, wait a second. Why should we we don't need to hire a skilled CISO. We got an awesome guy who's been here as the CTO and CDO. Let's just throw CISO on top of that, because CISO already has the data and has the technology. Why not? And that is horrendous, for a Fortune 10 company, and then ironically, it was Change Healthcare, and the person came into UHG because he was the CTO of Change Healthcare. Right. So he was responsible for essentially securing the environment that was screwed to begin with. And, you could go on like that, but, there's a little bit of dumbing down the profession by some people, but simultaneously, a CISSP, I'm not saying a person who has a CISSP is anywhere near by default capable of being a Fortune 10 CISO.
But they shouldn't be. It's a baseline.
It's a baseline, much like working as a doctor in a hospital. You need an MD, or a DO, or whatever they call, are throwing in today. But at least they have some acknowledged training for the role and appropriate training.
Yes. Yeah. We had that conversation when we interviewed Sandy, and how and why the CISSP and IC squared came about. And of course she likened it to CPA. Again, you're going to just go to anybody and have them do your books for you, or you're going to go to somebody who's trained and qualified by that accreditation to be able to manage your money. So
yeah, I mean, exactly, because a CPA is attesting to, now, not in theory, let me just be clear, not every accountant in theory needs to be a CPA. Not everybody who has their accounting done in theory needs a CPA. Public companies and people who are, well, actually just public companies need a CPA to write it off. Other companies who want, for example, a SAS 70 or whatever they're calling it today, those people need that work done by a CPA because that's the organization that developed the standard for that. But in general, the average organization in theory doesn't need a CPA. But if I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to court, and if something ever happens where people are going to accuse you of fraud, they're like, oh, then the accountant walks in and you're like, oh, well, gee, that person isn't a CPA. Couldn't you have hired one?
Right.
Well, they're just more expensive. Why would I do that?
Yeah.
But there's continuing education requirements. There's, I'm not saying continuing education requirements or anything else is like a gold standard in theory, but at least it says the person has devoted some aspect of their time, energy, and money to promoting themselves as established in their career.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to bring us back to you because this is what the conversation is all about, is Ira. So, question I have for you is, over your distinguished career, what are some of the biggest accomplishments and contributions that you're most proud of?
I mean, the ones that seem to be best are people who call me a mentor or something, and I don't mentor anybody. No, I never did anything. They're like, oh, I'm in the profession because of, something you said, read, did, or whatever. I'm like, that's good. I hope you're good at your job then. But, that's kind of on the rewarding side. There have been some incremental accomplishments along the way. One job I remember, I actually saved the Pentagon $500,000, like they actually cared, because I kludged together a system instead of having to, I figured out a way to take off the shelf technology and then just put it together in a way that they didn't have to build something from scratch to be certifiable, because when you're connecting to I don't know if you ever heard of the AutoDIN network, but we're putting a system that pulled AutoDIN information in and then would process it and distribute it. It was the first intranet in the Pentagon. And I figured, let me just buy a board for a PC, shove it in the PC, and then do an NFS mount onto the Sun system, and it would automatically take the system on the PC, or take the messages on the PC and then shove it into a Sun server. And then that way we didn't have to write AutoDIN software from scratch, which would have taken years or months at least, and then had to go through a full certification process. So that I'm still proud. Even though my bosses are like, when I put in my performance appraisal, say, this project $1 million and money, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because he was clueless to understand exactly what I did.
Yeah.
But, there's things like that. The fact that in many cases, getting people into the career also implies I have made a dent in things in cybersecurity in some way, shape, or form. Really proud so far. I don't know, Andy Smeaton, one of the speakers at CruiseCon, said CruiseCon is my legacy, which, I'm like, okay, let's see what that gets me. But at the end of the day, because it's kind of a passion project, because I really think that, the cybersecurity conferences have become a mediocre caste system where you go to RSA, and I'm not bad-mouthing RSA because RSA is a great event, but RSA is an experience more than it's an event. And so if you're a really cool kid, you get invited to the president's dinner, which literally has a president show up. If you are, then if you're not that cool, you go to the Night Dragon event, and with a bunch of others, then you could go to Wing Capital or Sandler Piper or whatever. And then if you're not cool enough, you're lucky to get a free expo pass to the expo floor.
That's me. I'm just saying, when I saw you post the CruiseCon, it was like, that is absolutely brilliant. Never been
Mm-hmm.
on a cruise before. I have actually, Cailin she had grown up going to RSA because of
Mhm.
our involvement with ISSA and all the events we went. So I think not being in the profession, she probably went to at least 17 years of RSA.
Mm-hmm.
So when I saw, and I've had that experience, and I agree with you, Ira, it is an experience. And I do miss it when I don't go. I feel, the FOMO, the fear of missing out.
Mhm.
But when I saw that posting you had of CruiseCon, it's like, that is brilliant.
Immediately.
And
Yeah.
that's why I signed right up, because it was, to be quite honest, it was an intimate setting. You really have a captive audience. How the hell are you going to get off the ship? It's not like RSA, you can go, play down by the waterfront or whatever, play hooky. You are on the ship. So the experience was absolutely incredible, ingenious. And I agree with Andrew that it is a legacy, but I think, pardon me for saying so, you're much more than that, Ira.
I
Yeah.
appreciate that, but it's like interesting the way people's lives and careers go. Like, where do you stand out? Because
Mhm.
I mean, this is like, it's not, this is deeper than this conversation, but you look at people like every so often, I actually think cemeteries are cool places. Some
Yeah. Yeah.
places you go, the monuments they put up that aren't that boring and everything. But you look there and then you see, okay, what did these people in theory accomplish years later? Like, even looking at it and thinking about, for example, going around Rome, or one time I was in Amman, Jordan, and you go in Amman, Jordan, and the thing you least expect to see are Roman ruins.
Oh,
The
wow.
Roman ruins are there in downtown Amman, Jordan. And you sit there and think, okay, what are we going to be leaving behind like 2,000 years from now? And so you're like, okay, well, gee, maybe make a person, there's something along the way there. And that's kind of, interesting. And then you figure, okay, so everybody's from somebody, and that, like, somehow the people who survived, like, people don't realize, like, all the hell and shit everybody through the beginning of mankind has gone through,
Right.
between
Mhm.
genocides, wars, famines, all these other things, plagues, and then figure out, okay, and you're lucky enough to get around, then it's like, okay, well, what are you going to leave behind? And it's like, it's hard, you sit there and look, and it's like, am I going to be more than a tombstone at some point?
Right.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, maybe not. My wife jokes about having a bench with her name on it, but she wants the bench, in memoriam before she dies so she can sit on it. So if you know Adriana, you met Adriana. She's like,
Mhm.
Yes.
"Here, if I die, the bench could break. I just want people, I want to sit on my bench." But um,
That's great.
but it's like a matter of, yeah, maybe when you talk about legacies and stuff like that. But in general, I like to think a little bit. I was told that, because of my writings on human factors, this one bank reevaluated and was able to catch millions of dollars of fraud and stuff. And I'm like,
Yes.
okay, that's handy.
Yes.
I go, could I get a percentage of that? That would help.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
could buy Adriana a chair and put my name on it too in some part. But you look at all these things and it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. At the end of the day, it's like, frankly, when I die, it's going to be like, okay, who remembers me is going to be the bigger
Mhm.
thing and what I did.
Yes. I
Yeah.
think I think that will not be a challenge. Again, that's one of the reasons why we have you on here. You're
Mhm.
one of the heroes throughout our history of cyber. You really are. I mean,
Depends who you speak to.
well, let's put it this way: you are memorable.
Yeah,
um,
I once had, I don't know if you remember, what was his name? Oh, he was with RSA, Kurt Stamberger. So I don't know if you remember him. He was one of the original people who started RSA and everything. Or was, well, he didn't necessarily start, but he was really instrumental in the late 1990s, 2000s. He went on to be like CMO for Makana, I think was his last cyber job, and he had me speak at an event. And he kept interesting statistics on all the speakers. And one of the events, and so what happened was he said, which sessions did you like most? Which sessions did you like least? And things like that. And I tied at the time, it was a Secretary of Homeland Security. I forgot the guy's name, but it was like this one guy, one of the early secretaries of Homeland Security, the guy after Asa Hutchinson. But he was, so I tied him for first place. And then I looked at the statistics, and I also was in third place for the session people disliked the least. And
Polarizing.
I went to Kurt. I go, well, I don't know what to think about. He's like, Ira, at least they remembered your session.
Yes. Oh
Well,
my
the
God.
thing is though, I think, one of the things as well that you're known for is you speak from the heart
Mhm.
and you speak from the truth.
Yeah.
And I think, whether people want to acknowledge it or not, it's who you are. You're genuine, and you don't do it maliciously. You're doing it for the right reason, and that's to improve our world.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing it just because it comes out of my mouth and it's really how I feel. Like, I just learned to turn off the filters. It's like, there are two things, like, because one of the things I'm really, really good at, and I know what it is communication. There are people who are theoretically better than me in different aspects of technology and cybersecurity. But what makes me stand out is my ability to communicate it, even if well, I will never talk on things I'm mediocre on, but even if I'm mediocre, I can still communicate it. And that's one of the issues that I've learned. So, two things. One is I know I will fuck up in the middle of a presentation probably a couple dozen times, but I know it. I also have come to learn that probably the audience won't pick it up. If the audience if I get the feeling, I just say, gee, that was stupid. And then I move on. Because you can't, it's like if I'm going to filter everything I say, I get nothing out.
Right.
I remember my ex-girlfriend, she heard me speak, and I remember I was talking about how violating cybersecurity policies and downloading a virus and ruining the company, like people will go ahead and say, you need to be more aware. Please don't do that again. But looking at porn will automatically get you fired.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't know about you, but I like looking at breasts like as much as the next person. But ruining the company, that's kind of over the line.
It's a thing. Yeah,
And
it's
I just
pretty
remember
big.
he walked out of the room in disgust. And it was okay. We broke up. But the point was, the point though was that it's like I'm not afraid to say those things,
Right.
and more
Yeah.
people. Well, frankly, there is an art to it. Like if people would be sincere and honest, and actually, I think if people would be sincere and honest, we'd probably get rid of 95% of speakers out there.
Right.
Yep.
They really don't have anything of valuable to contribute, honestly.
Right.
But it's that. Then there was another time where I was teaching, like when I got my master's degree, and this is actually relevant. When I got my master's degree, I was working at NSA, and my friend said, now that you do that, you could make like a few, because he's like, you can teach for the community college and make a few thousand extra dollars. I'm like, okay. So I taught, I applied for Anne Arundel Community College. And then they're like, okay, well, we have advanced Unix. Can you teach? I'm like, yeah, I could teach advanced Unix. And then they came to me before the semester started saying another instructor backed out, and they also have an introduction to information systems. And they were saying, look, everybody who's in there, they really don't want to be there. It's a required class for the most part, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm like, yeah, I could pick that up. So anyway, the advanced Unix class, I would show up in a suit. I'd have a briefcase, which is so not me. And then I would teach the class. I try to take it seriously. Then the other class was on a Saturday morning. I'd show up in T-shirts and a shorts and and then just teach it. And then what happened was at the end of the year, I got the evaluations. I was really excited. I opened up the advanced Unix class, and those people hated the air I breathed. And I'm like thinking, there goes my teaching career.
Right.
Just put the other one aside. Then a couple hours later, I thought, because I was thinking, if that's the one I cared about was that bad, I can't imagine what the other one's going to look like. Then after a few hours, I'm like, I got to get this over with. I opened it up and they loved me. And then lesson learned, take the stick out of your ass.
Exactly.
And
Yep.
so that's been the logic that I've had ever since in presenting in front of audiences.
Yeah.
Some people get upset. I remember I was speaking in front of Microsoft when they had this relaunch. Microsoft brought me in to teach all their developers fundamentals of security. And they really wanted at the time, if people remember, well, people know George Kurtz, but that was when Foundstone was big, his company there. And a lot of the developers in Microsoft wanted Foundstone to do the teaching. So a lot of people were like really irritated they picked me. And what happened was I get there and it's like, gee, I thought we were going to get a class on security, not an attempted performance by a would-be stand-up comic.
Wow.
That wasn't the worst I ever got. The worst I ever got, it was kind of funny because the best evaluation I ever got was from RSA. It was an RSA evaluation. Now remember, RSA has like 10 concurrent sessions and everything. Somebody wrote, Ira gets worse every year I see him. Why do you keep bringing him back?
Oh my
And I'm like sitting there, this is my most loyal fan. Like,
Right, because he keeps coming back.
I mean, I'm like, what are you, it's like for a while, you're just sitting there thinking, okay, like there's a hate page about me on the internet.
I love it.
Thinking, like for a while, I'm like, what the fuck did I ever do to these people?
Well,
And they're thinking I'm living rent free in their heads,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But
And so it's like, it just doesn't pay because like some people just hate to hate. I'm like,
yes.
are you just coming to my session to give me a bad evaluation? I'm like,
But this brings it around too, because you're a CISO. CISO, you want to talk about somebody that people love to hate. It's the CISO. So how do we as CISOs, or the higher up you get, the more of a target on your back. How do you learn the coping skills of not really giving a crap that people are going to blame you? I mean, look at how many CISOs have taken the fall, right? How do you build those skills to toughen up and not take it personally?
well, the problem is I think a lot of CISOs aren't right for their jobs because part of the problem is a CISO has to have the right, like, I joke, well, it's not a joke, but a lot of times I find that CISOs are losers. They talk like losers, they act like losers. And what I mean by that is when you are there, like, I would attend, I attend CISO luncheons. I remember like hearing, well, I put in for my budget and I did a good job, I think I'm going to get it. And I'm like, and then everybody was talking the same way. I'm like, really? I go, seriously, here's the truth. If you are a CISO, you are providing a mission enabler for the entire company.
Yep.
So, for example, you look at a brick and mortar company, Walmart doesn't like when people talk about them, but I'll talk about them in this case. Walmart, you look at cybersecurity at Walmart, they sell cheap stuff. That's their mission. They sell things as cheap as possible to still make a profit and rely on data science to keep it there. Now, where would cybersecurity come in? They, however, understand that Jerry, the CISO of Walmart, is one of the most important people in the organization because if you don't have cybersecurity, you can't have PCI compliance, so you can't take credit cards. You're not going to have supply chain security, which is going to potentially ruin and cripple the company because if you're operating on razor thin margins, one little hiccup can cost you millions or sometimes billions of dollars at that scale. You need to be able to go ahead and process people. You need to protect customer information. And it's sort of like cybersecurity is a critical enabler of even the brick and mortar company like a Walmart. And any person who, I mean, and a CISO, I don't want to say they should be arrogant, but a CISO should be like, look, here's my job. I enable everything else in the company, which for the most part is true.
Right.
And I'm not saying they're the only enabler. They're without them, everything would, it's not that it would stop, but CISOs are providing a mission critical function that whether or not they want to consider a cost, it's a major benefit to the organization. And they need to be able to portray that.
Yes.
Then, as important, after they are portraying that, they go, look, here's the budget I want. Here's what the budget is going to put up. And if you don't want to go ahead and give me that budget, that I'm documenting it, and that's on you. Not like, gee, I hope and pray I get the information because I think I made a good job, good, justification. It should be like, look, I am providing a critical thing. Here's what I need to do my job properly. And if you're not going to give it to me, there's a cost. I joke,
yeah.
like
Right.
Dan Meacham, like he's CISO of Legendary Entertainment now. Like he was CISO at Aramark. And one day back in I guess it was 2000, probably 9-ish, because it was right after iPads came out. He pulls me over and he's like, Ira, let me show you my iPad because you'll really like it. I go, I know what an iPad looks like. He's like, it's the app on the iPad, you idiot. I'm like, okay, what's your app? So he shows me this app and he pulls it up. He's like, when I go to my budget meetings, I say, okay, here's the budget I want, here's, whatever. And then they go, well, we're not going to give you 250 million. We'll give you 220 million. He's like, okay, that's your privilege. Then he goes, okay, but then he opens up his app. He goes, okay, I asked for 250 million. You give me 220 million, presses the next button. And then a page comes up and says, well, for the savings of $30 million, the exposure goes up by $785 million, et cetera. So I'm informing you that by not giving me 30 million, you're going to call it's potentially a $785 million risk. And then you hit the next button, and the next button is a signature page that says, I have asked for this. You have offered me this. This is then this, and so on. I don't think he ever got fired. I joke that to this day, I still think it was a random number generator. But it was,
Yeah.
That would be hysterical. That's definitely one thing that I constantly am reminding myself in my job is and in life, I'm just basically a consultant. If you here's your evidence, here's your risks. If you guys want to sign off on it, not my problem anymore.
Well, you do want the CISO because, in my books, I always write the Department of How, not the Department of No.
Right.
Yes.
And, your job is not to necessarily say no. Your job is to say, if you're going to do this, here are the risks and here's what it takes to mitigate the risks. Now, at some point, you have to say, are you fucking kidding me? And then, that's something that is not going to be doable. But the problem is you're not there. And then if somebody comes, you're the person who made my password 20 characters. I'm like, I didn't make your password 20 characters. It's the people who stole $50 million from our competitor who made it 20 characters. Well, actually, I don't believe in making it 20 characters for the record, but I'm using that as an example.
Right.
But that's the type of thing where a CISO has to say, look, and if they can't put together their own promotion and they're hated and despised, a lot depends on this. Because frankly, a lot of CISOs should not be CISOs. There's a lot of CISOs who talk about themselves being CISOs who haven't been a CISO for a long, long time. They were like CISO once or twice for a year or so. And then all of a sudden they go around like, I'm a CISO for their own company. So, those are people that I would not hire to be a CISO.
And it's okay not to be a CISO. I mean, there's much.
It's like an identity, and it's like, okay, not everybody should be a CISO. There is a business element, and frankly, a lot depends. And maybe you can be a CISO, but not for the organization in question.
Right.
Because what people need to understand, there are different levels of CISO. So if you're a CISO, like at a Walmart, your job is, yes, overseeing a team of 1,000 people, whatever it is today, and making sure that you have your leaders are setting up to do the operational things. but your job is primarily ensuring that the board and the executives and everything else are getting what they need working the organization. Then you have some CISOs, once you're down, like, actually, I don't know where the line is. I don't know if you know Todd Inskeep, but he said he did his research, and like below the Fortune 350 is the cyber poverty line. When you get below the cyber poverty line, you're dealing with CISOs who are essentially more project managers and,
Right.
contract managers, because they don't have the resources to hire full teams of their own. They're more hiring contractors, figuring out what they could outsource and things. Then you have CISOs of product companies or whatever, or even high tech companies where they're figuring out how to hands-on secure the technology more than theoretically trying to adjust, like, the needs of the board and things like that. So there are different CISOs for different jobs, but then there are just some people who are incompetent no matter which job it would be.
Unfortunately.
Okay.
I have one more question I want to ask, well, actually two, but this first one before we close, and the first one is, of course, forward-looking. Where do you see, in your opinion, the cybersecurity profession heading in the next 5 to 10 years?
So I tend to say it's going to be more of the same. I don't see there's revolutionary changes. I see evolutionary changes. Too many people think this, and this. I see a lot of talk and hype about AI, and I really hate that. Like, my presentation at RSA this year was AI is just math. Now, what I'm actually expecting is that a lot of roles and a lot of things in AI can be, I don't want to say replaced, but be performed by generative AI.
Yeah.
Like writing reports, writing documents. They better know how to verify what AI is putting out. That's number one. But at the same time, you're going to be able to automate a lot of functions. You're going to be able to speed things up a little bit, which will be good. It does mean that teams can be a little bit smaller and more efficient.
Yeah.
But I still think that underlying this all is going to be fundamentals, and AI is not going to necessarily replace. Well, in theory, we've had AI. Well, people don't realize we've had AI in theory for a while. Like, you look at automatic updates of PCs. Technically, if we were 30 years earlier, or if it was 30 years later, it would have been, we have agentic AI to perform automatic updates. Just like Microsoft Auto Update, that's a program. But now we call it generative AI. Agentic AI. But,
Yep.
so there might be a little bit more of that, but I even look at that agentic AI as just an updating of like auto update.
Well,
And people just get so because it doesn't matter to me. What we're looking at. We are able to automate tools help us with our job.
Yes.
And AI, I hate the word AI, but AI
It's a tool.
tools that use algorithms that are associated with AI. That's the best way to say it.
Yep.
That use AI related algorithms are able to make better, faster decisions than a user might be able to make themselves.
Right.
So, for example, I gave another presentation at the ISACA event last couple of weeks ago, and that was in applying, I don't want to use the word AI, but applying decision science and AI to the process of running a cybersecurity program. Because we've already used AI in anti-malware, in SIMs, and stuff like that. But really, we haven't applied data science, and I'm very specific about the term data science, to running a cybersecurity program, like how do we allocate resources and that. And I think that can be a good improvement, because every other profession, like you look at the CFOs, you look at the COOs, they're all using data science to optimize their organizations. We are not yet doing that.
Kind of dumb, isn't it?
Well, again, it's the simpleton nature of a lot of CISOs. Like at Walmart, we had a data science team.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we're Fortune 1, we could. And then like I mentioned, Fortune 350 is not going to be able to hire a team of data scientists like Walmart can.
Nope.
but at least hopefully vendors will start using tools to make it more efficient. The problem is I'm at a company where we do have such tools, but then it's like, well, Gartner doesn't have a magic quadrant, so people don't allocate the budget for it.
Right. Right. Okay, so the last question I have, and I typically ask this of the cyber luminaries and heroes, is talking about those that have
Mhm.
left us. They have departed. And I've thrown out some names and some thoughts. And rather than do that, knowing, because I mean we both grew up in this profession, who that has left has been instrumental and comes to mind for you as being one of your heroes or mentors.
I guess we'll stick with the recent ones, but frankly, probably Howard Schmidt was
Yeah.
probably the big one people don't really remember. He was essentially the first cybersecurity czar. For all practical, it wasn't called that, but that's what he was. He was an investigator. He was CISO at Microsoft. He
Hmm.
was CISO, running, Microsoft security program. That's kind of an important thing that's been embedded in, like Howard's work in theory has been embedded in everything we do. He was very involved, I think, in eBay, in the early stages of eBay
Yep.
as well.
Yep.
And, so he secured a lot of the early e-commerce, drove electronic payment technologies and things like that. So again, in many ways, he was probably the person that gets the least amount of credit and had to put up with the most amount of aggravation given why he went back to the government. I remember talking to him, like you, Thompson, and this was a it was a surreal moment, but I remember it was probably around 2000. I forgot when did Obama became president in 2008? So it was probably around 2008, 2009. Oh no, he was elected in 2008. Oh, but so this would have been 2009, 2010. Like you, Thompson, and we were speaking at a Hacker Halted conference, and so was Howard, and it was being held in Miami. And Howard was, traveled all over the place, and he had his Marriott give some suites because I don't think there was too many people else that stayed at Marriott's more than him. And so and he's like, "Come up to my room. I got a fruit basket." He's like, so we went up to Howard's, and I remember Howard talking. I'm like, what idiot is going to take that role to be cybersecurity czar? And then he's like, I don't know, that role could make And then I walked out of the room with you because we were going back to. I'm like, yeah, Howard's going to take that job. So, but you look at somebody who took the role specifically for the mission. And
Yes.
frankly, Chris Inglis, who's a friend, and Chris Inglis, just as a heads up, a first announcement, will be the keynote speaker at Con 2026 in February. But I was talking to Chris Inglis. I'm like, here's Chris, who was an Air Force general. He became deputy director of NSA as a civilian. Then he left the government to become the national cybersecurity czar, under Biden, I guess it was at the time. And I'm sitting there like, why did you do it? Because, now he's working for a venture capital. And he was working for a venture capital firm after he left NSA.
Right.
He's like, it's the mission. And people like him
Yes.
think serving the public is their priority. And, that's like Howard and Chris and other people deserve a lot of credit that, for putting up with this.
Well, I don't know about you, but I think about some of my personal heroes, and Howard definitely is one. And you think about the commonality of all of them, and it's their humble in nature, always looking to give back. And I mean, let's face it, you talk about Howard saying, "Oh, come on up to my suite. I've got a huge fruit basket." I mean, but that's who Howard was. I mean, I remember being, out at a conference, ISSA conference, out in, I think it was Anaheim. And he's like, I saw you and your husband going for a ride in that convertible Mustang, and I wanted to go, and so he ended up going to dinner with us. But I mean, he was like so approachable, so
Yeah.
down to earth.
And it was bizarre because I once spoke at a conference in Riyadh, and Howard was in the conference as well. And they took all the speakers out, and this was and the Saudi internal ministers of something were there. And Howard was like, they were all motorcycle fanatics. Like
Oh yeah,
Howard was,
yeah, 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 yeah.
and he's like, yeah, come out to Seattle and we'll ride to Milwaukee to go to Harley Davidson headquarters.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is a unique one. So
Yeah. But that's who he was. I mean, it didn't matter if you were a head of state or a head of cleaning the bathroom. Howard and so many others that were leaders in our profession, they were all humble like that. They all treated you the same.
well, yeah, the one part, and this is kind of actually entertaining now looking back, but the one part, just don't be Frank Abagnale or another convicted criminal. God, Howard, I remember one time Howard was backing out of a talk because Abagnale was there. And then one time I think it was like roughly 2000, I think it was like 2019 or so. I was speaking at RSA in Singapore, and Frank Abagnale was the keynote speaker there. And Abagnale was and he's been since broadly discredited. Just, you can look this up. But, he wasn't even that fake pilot or something. He was in jail the whole time. He was supposedly a fake pilot and everything. But what happened was, I remember I went up to him because I read Abagnale's book, The Art of the Steal. And I'm like, and in that book, he describes very specifically how he spent his, he did all his time, the FBI didn't get him out, blah, blah, blah. And then how he would then go ahead and offer his services to banks where he would give them a lesson in check fraud and they would pay him if they liked it. But anyway, during the talk, there were a couple, I'm like, Abagnale was saying, oh, the FBI got him out. Like, he was talking about the movie ending, not the ending that's actually in the book he wrote, that the movie was based on. And then I'm like, yeah, I work for, he's talking about how he's proud to work for the FBI. And I was like, doesn't sound right at all. So anyway, but then it turns out I was in business class flying back, and Abagnale was 2 rows behind me. And I go next to him. I'm like, you mentioned, it's like, yeah, I was a speaker. I saw your session there. And, what did you do for the FBI out of curiosity? I'm a special agent. I'm like, this is complete bullshit. There's
so vague.
Absolutely zero way, even in the grand scheme of things, that somehow they forgave everything they did, that Abagnale would be going around the world while employed by the government, charging people $20,000 a speaking engagement while also being an FBI special agent. So I knew that was complete bullshit. Then I'm like, I get back and I start and I pull up my phone. I start texting Howard. I go, Howard, I'm 2 rows in front of Abagnale, and I just spoke to him, and he claimed, what's the truth about him being a special agent for the FBI? He's like, once a fucking liar, always a fucking liar. And if you know Howard, Howard never cursed, but this was an expletive-laden message where every other word was a curse regarding Abagnale.
I don't think I've ever heard Howard Schmidt speak so badly. So that's pretty profound. There
was no, Howard's usually, especially, this is while he was in the White House. There would have been you would have assumed some diplomacy, but there was none.
Yeah, no holds barred there.
I'm like, Howard, have you been around me too long?
Yeah, a little bit. See? That's why we call our podcast, Refined and Feral. He definitely went feral.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Ira, I can't thank you enough for joining us. I think this has been a really fun conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. And again, I see the more we interview the cybersecurity luminaries and heroes, the more commonality I see. Again, you're humble, you're honest, you're genuine, and I know the world will, remember you for that. I can say without a doubt. And I personally appreciate your honesty. I know in the past we've not always saw eye to eye, but we always were true to our positions, and we're still talking and friends after all these years. So I think that too is a lesson, for cyber professionals around the world. So
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
one last thing I will say is again, I'm a huge fan of your concept of CruiseCon. So let's do a little plug. You have 2 coming up.
Yeah, technically I have 5 coming up. Long story. Yeah, you have to start planning out. Once you have the first one, But yeah, first October, and the only one we're taking reservations for now is October of 2025, and that'll be going out of the port of LA because the first one was out of the West Coast, or out of the East Coast. So we're trying to support the people on the West Coast. So that's going out for pretty much a long weekend. So people should do it, and it's still. I was just looking today. It's $1,850, which is cheaper than just the entrance for most major conferences,
Yes.
let alone
Yep.
cost, the cruise, and everything else. And then I think, yeah, that's pretty much it. CruiseCon.com. You could go use the code IRA10 for a 10% discount. Actually, if you guys want, I'll give you a discount code for your podcast. If you,
Yeah.
you know, and
Sure.
you have your own to give out. But yeah, that's it. I mean, we got Bob Bigman is the keynote speaker. We have one of the more actually the most popular session from the original CruiseCon was our CISO Ask Me Anything, where we had Fortune 200 CISOs. Now we're going to have a deputy CISO panel on this one, because people were saying, well, what they were talking about was good, but those people are just so far up, it's not relatable, even though everybody loved what they were saying. So we had a deputy CISO who are much more on the hands-on operational thing and closer to the people who were asking the questions. And then obviously quality content throughout.
Absolutely. And goes without saying, the free time, if you will, the ability to network and bond and really get to know your fellows, and doing ship activities is a ball. We had so much fun.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually why I created, like I mentioned, those VC events like you go to. It's not, you don't care about, I mean, don't get me wrong, the content is great, but you care more about, like, when you're running around like the Israeli desert playing the Amazing Race at some of these events, like I was, it's more the experiences and the camaraderie that comes with it. And that's what we were trying to create with CruiseCon. And Sunil, one of our last speakers, he recommended an improvement for us because we're going to give people wristbands so that this way, when people take their badge off at the end of the conference, there's some way to still recognize other people from the event. And if you're wearing a wristband, you're welcome to be approached. So.
Cool. Yeah, because we've seen all those people walking around San Francisco with their badges.
I judge them so hard. Nobody needs to know your name and your company you work for in downtown San Francisco. Take it off, sir.
I might fit into this, and I'll tell you why. Those badges at RSA are so annoying. Yeah. And then it's like this year they were like folded up, and they were cardboard and everything like that. So they were a lot harder. If you put them in your pocket, they get all crinkled and everything. So it was just easier to keep them on than it was, because they're too big to put in a pocket.
Yeah, it's absurd. It's obnoxious, but I appreciate the wristband idea, and we'll definitely be seeing you on the East Coast CruiseCon for sure. It's a great idea. Again,
yes, so much fun.
Yes. So thank you very much. And with that, we'll go ahead and close it out.